Well, I'm here with Josef Brinkmann, and it's great to be with you, Josef.
Hey, Sebastian. Thanks for having me. Good to see you again from across the ocean.
Yes, for those of you that don't know, Josef, he's a medicinal plant expert, a researcher, published author, and also the research fellow in botanical medicinal plants and supply chain at Traditional Medicinals, and been lucky enough to cross paths many times over the years in our work with Fair Wild and sourcing herbs. And so, yeah, just looking forward to a really good conversation with you about, the state that we're in at the moment in the herbal medicine world, and dive into some of the challenges and solutions that you might have some insight into. So, yeah, it's a big question, Josef, but
Yeah,
what's your summary of where we're at the minute in the herbal medicine world? What do you think is going on?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking about ecology or regulations, trade. That's a big topic. There's a lot of issues that are interrelated with regard to, for example, you're in Europe with market access and all of the increasing regulations in Europe that test for every possible contaminant you could find, which is impacting farmers. That's one topic. I just got back from about 3 weeks on the road visiting a number of farms, and the daunting reality of what can be tested for and what limits are being set and whether it's even worth it to export medicinal plants to Europe is actually under discussion with a lot of farmers around the world because of the regulations, but the reality that many of the contaminants really have always been there or have been there at minor amounts. It's just that people are testing for them now. So I think that impacts the trade and use of medicinal plants. And when I say contamination, I don't mean deleterious amounts of things. Machine harvested herbs have always had some weeds in the mix. It's almost impossible to prevent, but but now laboratories are testing for everything. That's one thing. On this most recent trip, I visited about 15 farms over 3 weeks in India, and some farmers were directly reaching out and asking, what ideas do you have about how we can get through these longer drought periods, in unpredictability of the monsoons? When the rains come, it's too much all at once. Hoping that folks in the buying markets in North America and Europe have some helpful ideas on not only methods of agriculture or crops that might be drought resistant or might be more suitable, but new technologies. They see what's happening, and and I've often said, if you don't believe that significant climate change is happening, talk to farmers. And so I have been talking to them, and I think the reality of some of the recent crop shortages, crop failures in the last 5 to 10 years has a lot of farmers around the world thinking about, should I even be growing what I'm growing now? Should I be growing something different? And that ties into the first point I made, which is, if you have a choice, and if part of your land is being used for subsistence or for food security, and part of it's being used to grow high-value medicinal plants for the export market, but the export market is putting higher and higher barriers to entry, you might just decide to grow food for the domestic market. So that, to some extent, that addresses part of your question about medicinal plants or the state of herbal medicine. And I've wondered myself, you've probably wondered this as well, whether the materia medica that herbalists rely on or companies rely on, that require import, that aren't produced where you live, I don't know. That range of plants might shrink. People might need to get more clever and look at what's growing around them a bit more. And that raises all sorts of other questions about livelihoods and tradition and traditional ecological knowledge, traditional medical knowledge, and transmission of that knowledge. And it's understandable people need to make different decisions in times of crisis. And I'll say one more thing, because this is a conversation and I've already been talking without interruption for about 5 or 6 minutes. But there is also a mass migration of people. You see it in Europe, people coming from Western Asia and Africa into Europe. And I saw on the television news here this morning that we're averaging about 10,000 people a day coming to the United States border, a lot of them coming from Nicaragua and El Salvador and Guatemala. So, it's impossible to determine how many are climate refugees, how many are looking for a better life. They could be both the same thing, are trying to escape oppression. All of it could be related. But that's what we're faced with, and we're talking about herbal medicine. But when large amounts of people pick up and leave, and their former occupation was wild collection of plants or farming where they live, then there is a disruption in traditional knowledge. So you tell me what the state of herbal medicine is in the United Kingdom.
Well, similar in many ways. I mean, you paint a challenging picture because, I think, reflecting your experience on the ground, that there is the environment is contaminated in lots of ways, hence stricter and stricter regulations. That's a sort of separate area in a way, but also a farmer base and collector base, because the same happening in the wild to a certain degree, that is under pressure to deliver to those standards, but also suffering from climate crisis impact. And the third thing that challenges the herbal world is movement of labour, and then traditional growers or harvesters not wanting to do that. The younger people perhaps moving away because there's not enough value in their work, or enough security is also what you're sharing. So I think in the UK we obviously import a lot of our herbs into the country. There used to be quite a vibrant herbal growing community and industry, but that's slowly withered out, largely because of production volumes and cost, because it is often cheaper from abroad in Europe. But also this is where many of the species used in our materia medica come from. And so we suffer, or we face the challenge of those regulations on a daily basis. I suppose I land on the side of, because of the modern agricultural system and pressures on ecosystems, and we are prescribing whatever the legal definition is, in essence, medicines in terms of helping people's health and to enhance it. We want to make sure that we're using plants that are as ecologically and socially responsibly sourced as we can. And so, like with our food or our clothes, it's a similar relationship in a way. And so, even though those challenges are there, I'd rather know what they are, and I would rather work with people to try and find solutions to that. And, I am very bought into, and I'm a deep believer in third-party certification as a way of regulating that value chain if you can't go and visit or have such a direct relationship. And I hope, and I think we've probably all seen examples where when you do develop a closer relationship with your value chain and the farmers and the communities, then you can help understand their problems more directly, and where you can support, you can help mitigate that challenge, and they can understand our problems as well with pesticide residues or pyrrolizidine alkaloids or tropane alkaloids, or PAH, or these byproducts of combustion engines, etc. So that's how I see a way through the challenge that we face. Of course, you've also written, Joseph, I think you were the lead author, were you, in the Scientist Warning on Climate Change and Medicinal Plants paper?
Oh, that was Dr. Wendy Applequist was the
Applequist.
from Missouri Botanical Garden, right?
Sorry, along with Wendy Applequist, you wrote that, and I think that article really lays out the reality on the ground in a really groundbreaking way that I found when I came across it, and my understanding of how climate crisis is impacting the potential to practice herbalism, effectively due to availability, but also changing phytochemical balance within the plant.
Yeah, well, that's a fascinating area, and before I respond to that, something you mentioned triggered a memory. I recall reading a paper, and I'm sorry I can't remember the paper, but it was about what England did during World War II when their supply chain of medicinal plants was interrupted because it had been formerly coming through Germany, and there was a whole national campaign to get people to plant medicinal plant gardens in the war effort. So that it happened once before, where that. And we also have some of that history in the United States during the Civil War in the 19th century. Supply routes were interrupted, and there was more of a reliance on indigenous plants and learning from the tribes what plants were used for what during that time. Anyway, sidetrack. The paper with Wendy, yeah, the most fascinating part of that for me was the realization through some of the research that phenological mismatches were starting to happen and be observed, and also that some plants were moving, and that whole idea we're moving up in altitude. And I had read some surveys from about every 10 years in China, they do surveys in different parts of the country, and reading that certain plants that formerly only reached a certain altitude were now being found another 1,000 meters higher, and so on and so forth, that this push forward or push upward was the plants that had the ability to continue to move up to survive. That was happening and observable, and that's something that I wrote about in a paper that was where the lead author was Tony Cunningham as well, looking at high altitude plants, and basically there's once you get to the top, there's no more nowhere to go. So these ideas really blew my mind. The fact that plants can try to get away, animals can get away they can get away a little bit more easily to find a new place to go to with the weather changing. Certain plants can migrate fast enough and others cannot. So that area is fascinating to me. And then what you had asked me to write about for Herbal Reality was, what do we know about the change in chemistry? And of course, we don't know enough yet. Obviously, when a plant moves to a different altitude or is adapting to new conditions, the chemistry will change. So that could have an effect one way or the other on efficacy. So it's fascinating.
I mean, Joseph, just chipping in there, I think that herbalism in a way is the study and observation of nature, isn't it? Herbalists, by their practice and their relationship with plants and nature, are observing these changes. And over some timescales, could we say 30, 40, 50 years, with close observation, I wonder if there will be some, change in how plants get used clinically as well, potentially.
Well, that's true. I think historically, herbalist practitioners observe how the plants and the mixtures, the preparations from them work or don't work in patients, and that's how you build your knowledge on how you know what to prescribe. I've often wondered if an herbalist is buying herbs from the shop without awareness or visibility to the origin of the materials and awareness of the chemistry of the materials from country X or country Y, how the practitioner deals with that in the clinical setting. Wow, I've been prescribing this for a while, and 20 patients that responded well. I got a new batch from the shop, and and now the tincture is not doing what it should. I've often wondered about that, and I learn by observation. I put things in my mouth you probably shouldn't, but I make things and I try them and I see what they do to me. That's one way to learn. And I imagine other herbalists do similar things. And obviously, if you have the opportunity, or if you have a busy clinic and you're seeing lots of patients presenting with similar conditions, you have the opportunity to have a better idea of how the preparation's working in your population. But I think it's, visibility, you brought it up before. I think it is difficult for practitioners to have the access to the information about where the herbs came from. And at least here, I don't know about where you are. I think that's getting better. I think some herb shops or dispensaries are more consciously buying from suppliers who are transparent and will tell you where the herbs are coming from.
No, I think you're right. I think there is more and more of that available, and there's organic herbs. There's some companies that are publishing what the pharmacopoeial grade is, for example, or at least some of the phytonutrients in the tincture or the capsules, and I think that's super valuable. I mean, you've worked a lot with pharmacopoeias, Joseph, haven't you? And what do you think their role is in well, should we start with clinical herbalism in a way there at that level, and then perhaps the industry as a whole?
Well, the traditional pharmacopoeias, the pharmacopoeias that started to appear a few hundred years ago, aimed to describe the material at the pharmacy or the chemist shop or the druggist shop or whatever was being used for making preparations for patients. So the aim was, let's describe the quality that's used therapeutically. And in trade, even hundreds of years ago, there was certainly an awareness of different quality grades of the same herb that might have different intended uses. And sorting those grades in commerce, they have different values assigned. And the pharmacopoeias aim to define the therapeutic quality, the minimum. It has to be at least this to have a reproducible effect at this dosage for treating that if you prepare a tincture in this way, for example. So the original pharmacopoeias included basic information on how to discern whether you had the right quality. And over time, these have gotten better. In the United States Pharmacopoeia, first edition was in 1820. And back then, the tests and the descriptions were pretty basic. There was a companion publication called the United States Dispensatory that started coming, first edition in 1833, which had elaborated descriptions of the herbal drugs of commerce that you would find in the pharmacy. And so it's been over 200 years here since the first edition, and now the United States Pharmacopoeia has pretty detailed descriptions for identity, macroscopic, microscopic, HPTLC, some quantitative assay, and all of the pharmacognostic tests to make sure you have the minimum quality for the intended use. And some of the same herbs over here have completely different standards. For example, by the United States Department of Agriculture, if the item is to be used in foods. An example might be the USDA has USDA quality grades for American ginseng as a food. The United States Pharmacopoeia has quality grades for American ginseng as a dietary supplement. For those of you watching this, I don't want to get into it too far, but in the United States we have a middle ground. We have this area of dietary supplements between food and drug, but ostensibly the pharmacopoeial standards for dietary supplements are not much different from those if the substance was used as an active ingredient of over-the-counter medicine. Pretty detailed stuff. But the traditional pharmacopoeias in Asia to this day still combine pharmacognosy and therapeutics. So the Ayurvedic Pharmacopoeia of India, the Pharmacopoeia of the People's Republic of China, these sort of compendia include the tests to know if you have the right stuff. And they also have the indications for use and the, in traditional terms, the properties and indications for use. That doesn't really happen in the West. They're separate. In Europe, you have the European Pharmacopoeia, and where you are, the British Pharmacopoeia for quality testing of minimum quality. And then in the EU, you have the European Medicines Agency that has all the therapeutics and all the stuff that has to be on the label of the medicine. Mm-hmm. And same here, the FDA handles the labeling of herbal drugs here, and the USP handles the quality. I may have gotten way off on that, but the role of pharmacopoeias, I think they still matter, and they're getting better, and they just define a minimum quality. In my experience with companies, in some cases, the quality defined in the pharmacopoeia really is a minimum, and the company I'm affiliated with decides we want even one of the higher quality grades than what the pharmacopoeia requires, so that becomes an extra pharmacopoeia requirement if you want the real stuff. And to what you mentioned before, visibility, access, direct relationships with producers are essential in order to get access to specific qualities that meet pharmacopoeial standards and are produced using credible sustainability standards. And like you said, I'm also a believer, as you know, in third-party auditing of standards. I don't inherently trust companies who say their products are sustainable. And
I'm with you.
You're with me. Yeah, you disappeared. But
yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think in the world we live in the complexities of the growing, the harvesting, the transport, the risks all through the chain, and just the human connection of having some relationship to help people that you're working with and understand their challenges. I really agree. I mean, one thing that really strikes me for what you just said there is this expertise we've got in the pharmacopoeia in terms of quality, and it really is deep scientific expertise and therapeutics as well. Where does sustainability fit into these quality standards, Joseph?
Well, that's a good point, and it's actually being deliberated at this time by different pharmacopoeial committees around the world. I took note a couple of years ago, the Korean Pharmacopoeial Committee submitted a report to the CITES Secretariat, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species, with a tabulation of which pharmacopoeial articles in the Korean Pharmacopoeia were CITES listed plants. And so I've been taking note of that. The Mexican Pharmacopoeial Commission, in the third edition, which just came out last year, of I won't try to say it in Spanish, that would be embarrassing, but in English, the Mexican Herbal Pharmacopoeia, which is an official compendia of Mexico. It's annexed to the Mexican Pharmacopoeia, which has the synthetic drugs, and then they have the Mexican Herbal Pharmacopoeia. In the front matter, they make reference to the conservation status of Mexican species that are in the Pharmacopoeia, and provide a link to the national Mexico's national list of endangered species. So, and I know that other pharmacopoeial committees are discussing this. I did make a presentation. I'm a member of an expert committee with the United States Pharmacopoeia, and I did make a presentation a few years ago proposing that we start to at least inform users of the monographs of the conservation status of the botanicals, so that consumers, companies, practitioners can at least be informed and then maybe make informed decisions. And the reason I say that, it goes back to an initiative. I think you and I have talked about this, Sebastian, but years ago when I first started going to Chengdu, maybe 15 years ago, working on a project in the panda habitat in Sichuan province. I got to know some of the folks at the Chengdu University of Traditional Chinese Medicine, and around 2008 or 9, they were exploring ideas in the curriculum there to substitute endangered animal parts in the materia medica with plants that could be produced sustainably that would be reasonably expected to have the same pharmacological action. So they were looking to, can we modernize the TCM materia medica to stop using at least animal parts if there's a plant? And then the next question is, but the plant has to be sustainable. You can't substitute bear bile for a plant that is endangered or threatened. So I started to hear about that then, and I actually facilitated bringing one of the professors from the university, along with some folks from WWF China, to the American College of Traditional Chinese Medicine in San Francisco to make a presentation on that, because at the time the president at ACTCM was also involved with curriculum for all the schools of TCM in the United States. And, I got high on this idea, can we come up with a way for practitioners when formulating, even at a patient-specific basis, if they had some kind of system to say, all things being equal, if I want the basic formula for this patient to contain this, this, and this, but by using this database, I can see the conservation status of herb X is this, and I could substitute it for herb Y, which would be a better decision. I still think it's a fantastic idea. It would take years to put together.
I came across that in your article. You mentioned in your article, and just today, and we've also been working on that in another life I have with a group called the Herbal Alliance in the UK, which is a collection of the practitioner associations, a sort of community space that we have. We've also been thinking about, in terms of solutions for these areas, because complex area, the sustainability, and what does sustainability mean, and the value chain, the supply chain is so long and difficult for practitioners when they're busy, often living in a city, prescribing pre-prepared remedies. What can they do? And so
right.
I was wondering, did it get anywhere? Because we've been trying to develop a module in sustainability as well that would be a harmonized module to go into or be freely available to the colleges in the UK to include for their students, and then be a part of CPD and continuing professional development for those of us long in the tooth already.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. It'd be a massive undertaking, well worth it. It's resources and a competent team to sort through all the data and put it together. I've had conversations with a number of people trying to get at this from different angles, even making something freely available online that basically takes all of the herbs of commerce, and this might be maybe 5,000-6,000 herbs that are traded internationally, and it's one thing to gather the data and input it, but then to be relevant, it has to be managed and monitored and updated, because the status has changed, and it's not good enough to merely put in whether something is CITES listed and which appendix it's listed on. You really need to look at the national and regional assessments of it as well, which is getting better, and there's more of it all the time. And one of the recent projects I was fortunate to work on was assessing the global status of rhodiola species over a couple of years period, and I was just, I love it as a researcher when you can come across digitized books online that you didn't know existed, that you can download and access. But in that project, I realized that the Russian Federation, they have a red book for every territory and region and republic of the Russian Federation that's separate from the national red list. And then within that, they even have smaller regional red lists. And then expanding on that, I found that that's actually the case in a number of countries, or they don't call it a red list in the United States. Each state has different assessments of different species that occur in their states. And so with my mind, the idea of getting granular and gathering all of the data known about a species would be necessary, because the point is, something can be critically endangered in country X, but it can be least concern in country Y. So the population dynamics could be completely different, the trade scenario, the production scenario from one region to the next, even in a large country. So you can't make a blanket statement, this is an endangered species. It could be endangered here, but not here. So then it just necessitates management. It necessitates knowing where things come from and how they're coming to market. And I would love to see this happen, but it's a massive undertaking.
I agree with you that database is a great idea and would, of course, as you say, be a lot of detail and data. But I think there would be a way to, at least, there should be fundamental education in the basics of sustainability anyway, at least what are the workings of the value chain and this quality criteria we talked about, etc. You know, those are the sort of fundamentals, and those could empower people to make choices. And you could easily do something, I'd have thought, at least for some of the main species. You know, there is quite a lot of data on some of the CITES species and some of the fair wild species, for example. But I hear what you're saying about that regional, you know, specificity.
Well, it's easier, you know, if a species is endemic to one area, like you pick a country like South Africa or a country like Australia. There's a number of species that are endemic there that don't occur anywhere else unless they've been taken out of country and produced elsewhere. So in a case like that, it's much easier to determine what the population is and what the sustainable production scenario is for that species. But if a species occurs, like Rhodiola rosea occurs in 30 countries, it's circumpolar and occurs all the way around the globe and then down into mountain areas in Europe and parts of Asia. Getting the whole picture is really, really complicated.
I mean, Joseph, what do we feel about rhodiola? I mean, you know, you've really hit on a serious point that, I mean, you know, rhodiola has become, you know, one of the most popular adaptogens in retail, has been popular with herbalists for a long time, but, you know, the research on it, etc., really proving its benefit for many of modern day stresses or just life's challenges as an adaptogen, lifting the mood, etc. You can't speak for the whole industry, but, you know, what do we feel as a community that we've allowed that rhodiola to go on a CITES list? You know, how does that happen when we seem to know so much?
Well,
we know so little.
Yeah, well, I know a little bit of how it happened because one of the funded research projects that I was involved with produced a lot of the material that was reviewed to help make the decision for CITES listing of rhodiola species. So I'm probably not very popular at the moment. But the data was compelling, and some of the things we uncovered were alarming. And just the geography, the fact that most of the rhodiola in the world comes from an area, if people know their geography, where the Russian Federation hits Kazakhstan and Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region in Mongolia, but mostly southern Russian Federation in that area. But in our research, the levels of poaching that were being reported, and even in protected areas and transport across porous borders, confiscations, and coupled with other data such as more and more reports of finished products on the market containing other species, which is an indication of scarcity or rarity of the genuine article. And through interviews with companies and finding that demand was going up, yet cultivation experiments really have been going on since the 70s, and it's a particularly difficult case. If you've ever gone out to see rodeo where it lives in the wild, it likes to hang off of rocks.
I went to Scotland this autumn looking for it, and I found quite a lot, but right up in the northwest, gnarly cliff tops.
Right. Right, that's where it likes to live. So what we tried to emphasize in our work, Tony Cunningham and I and others, was that there have been efforts and there are efforts with farmers, particularly in the north, in Alaska and Alberta and Finland, Latvia, even Russian Federation, some other places, to cultivate it. But it's complicated because the farmers, for the most part, have determined after many years that it's likely a 6-year crop. And so therein lies the problem in the economics. How many farmers can afford to put a crop in and have no return on their investment for 6 years? And not only that, if you want to have a sustainable production, well, I'll just back up and say farmers are doing it. But farmers have also complained that so long as the wild collected material, the unregulated, undocumented wild material is commercially available, it's still coming to market at a lower cost than farmed material. So they weren't able to get people interested in making long-term commitments, which is absolutely essential to build up the organic cultivation base of it. Because really, a company has to take a position, say, well, I'm going to come out with a product, whether it's a consumer product or a professional product, and I want to use certified organically grown rhodiola roots. And therefore, I need to look in the crystal ball and see how much I'm going to need in the next few years, because not only am I asking to buy X tons from these farmers this year, but if I expect my product to still be in the market 6 years from now, I need them next year to plant, and then the year after to plant, assuming growth, plant more each year. So this farmer has all of these rotations on their land that are not making any money, where one sliver of the land each year gets harvested and then they plant again another plot. So you have to have a lot of land and the ability to do that. And, well, they do have a lot of land up in Canada to do this. But our pitch, or one of our conclusions in our work, was that industry does need to support the growers. And the growers are also, they've been honest about trying to figure out how to mimic wild quality, which hasn't been easy. Like we just mentioned, this herb hangs off the sides of rocks and in rocky scree and crevices, and maybe it doesn't like to live in neat rows on a farm. So figuring out how to have the same genetic material that can trigger the same stress responses to produce the same chemical composition. It's not so easy, but I think more and more the farmers have been working at this and they're getting there, and I think it is time. And obviously, with the CITES listing, it'll be harder and harder to get authentic material, particularly because of geopolitics, depending on what sort of relationships companies have with traders in the Russian Federation, and whether, there are examples, and I'm hearing there's an extraction house in Europe who may have certified organic, wild and cultivated roots coming out of the Russian Federation. But then there's an issue of access to go there freely, inspect. And when countries are taking sides in a war, that's really complicated. And in the case of rhodiola, which we also pointed out, the trade route for a lot of the Russian material goes across the border into the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region of the People's Republic of China, which is also at the moment not very transparent and difficult for Westerners to go there without a special visa and have a look around. So visibility is really a problem with this herb. So I would encourage anybody using it to build relationships with the farmers, like I mentioned, in Alaska and Alberta and in Scandinavia and wherever else people are trying to scale up, because they actually need a long-term advance commitment to put more on the ground.
Well, I like what you're saying, although I know it's probably not popular, but this idea of, limiting, unsustainable practices that are driving the price down so that those people that are trying to do it sustainably and ethically aren't rewarded. And it's the same as our food system. You're rewarded for growing cheap, unnutritious or, lacking in nutritious food, and you have to pay to be organic and fair trade. You have to pay a cost to be an ethical business. And that surely is the wrong way around. And, if any position of power is ever listening to this, it'd be great for the organic community and the ethical trading community to be supported in a more respectful way to their efforts and endeavours to help society and governments meet their targets in terms of, living wage, net zero, a society that looks after the source of our goods and the people that are involved in caring for them. So CITES is tough from a trading point of view, but I think for me it's like A&E, it's like the accident and emergency department in a hospital, isn't it? And that's, on our watch, rhodiola ending up there, I think is a wake-up call to the whole health and herbal community that we're all complicit in a way, because if you practice herbal medicine, many people, if you practice Chinese or Western herbalism, you're bound to be using rhodiola at some point. And so I think we've got to find a way to look at the list of herbs beneath the CITES list in a way and prevent any more going on there. And I know you wrote this recent paper, Joseph, about how we thought there were, 900 or so herbs in trade, and you've come up with a paper showing that there is over 3,000 and 3,200 or something.
In cultivation.
In cultivation, yeah.
Right.
Sorry, I said in trade, didn't I? Yeah, in cultivation. I know we've known there's more in trade, but you've gone from approximately 1,000 up to 3,000 or so.
Yeah. The before I get to that, I want to respond to one last thing you said, and it had to do with CITES. It is a blunt instrument, but it necessitates documentation for legal trade and identification of the material. So it is a bit of a rude awakening, but I suspect one impact will be that since all of the species are being listed, and there's like 90 rhodiola species, that this will lead to better identification. And furthermore, I think it also relates to our discussion about ethics and about doing the right thing. And when you're prescribing medicines or consulting people and advising them on what herbal medicines might be helpful to them, the whole idea that something you might be prescribing with frequency, if you're buying it off the conventional market, meaning no documents, an undocumented herb, which most herbs in global commerce, face it, are. If they're not coming with even if the bare minimum of documentation of organic certification, which at least gives you a window into the origin, you're buying undocumented herbs and you have no idea how many hands they changed. And you also have no idea if those herbs were poached from some beautiful landscape that's a protected area where poachers have come in and uprooted everything they could find for money and sold it to smugglers, which is and was the case with rhodiola. So you don't really want to be putting that in your medicine to your patients. So I think it's an opportunity for people to become more aware about where things come from and how they get from point A to point B, and to not support illegal trade, which can be rather common in border areas in particular, depending on how important or popular the substance is. And of course, CITES listing doesn't stop illegal trade. People still trade elephant tusks, and it doesn't stop it, but it provides a mechanism for action at borders if caught. And anyway, so
I mean, just one thing there. I mean, otherwise you're just left with the voluntary regulation. I mean, at least there are voluntary standards, like you said. I love what you said there. The bare minimum organic standards, Joseph.
yeah,
Lest we all hear that. And then in terms of wild collection, you've got,
fair
fair
wild,
wild.
right,
I mean, there's
much
other wild
better.
collection standards, UEBT and things like that as well that we should mention. But I think, that's what we want to be responsible herbalists, and there are these voluntary systems in place that you can support, and you can have a much greater confidence about how the people that are collecting or growing have been cared for, how the ecosystem's been cared for, and that does play into quality. There is a relationship
Exactly,
between the
exactly.
sustainability and the quality.
And a CITES listing of rhodiola is actually an opportunity for a producer group to implement the Fair Wild Standard, because the Fair Wild Standard requires risk assessment, resource assessment, monitoring, management plan. It gives everyone else in the value chain, in the trade chain, documentary evidence and assurances that this is coming to market sustainably. It's not a death sentence to go on CITES. Golden seal is on CITES from the United States, and so is American ginseng and other species. It just requires that you have a management plan and you have quotas and you have an understanding of the dynamics of the population, dynamics, regeneration, and you have a plan. You have a way to manage the harvest area. And that's the best case scenario. I imagine some operators where rhodiola grows wild will implement stricter standards that require independent third-party audits and documentation of how they're managing the population. And that's how it should be. It will cost more. Guess what? Sustainability is not free. So people will experience higher costs of raw materials, but botanical raw materials have been undervalued for centuries. So the real cost, if you include the costs of sustainable, wild, ethical, and responsible, sustainable resource management, it takes resources and labor and documentation and audits, and none of that's free. So, the prices will adjust up to what they should be, and there should be parity. The sustainably wild collected rhodiola should not be less expensive than sustainably cultivated rhodiola, and we'll see what happens in the coming years. You mentioned the other paper. I have to say the paper that was just published in Economic Botany, really of almost anything I've ever done. That one has captivated my spare time for some years, but and I'm delighted that it was published, and I'm delighted that the project was funded. It was funded by the German Federal Agency for Nature Conservation to try to see if we could update the numbers. In the 2000s, mid-2000s, a lot of numbers were floating around that maybe there were as many as 70,000 medicinal plants in use in the world. That doesn't mean in trade, because most medicinal plants are used locally or regionally and never traded out of their regional area. But maybe about 3,000 species were in global commerce, and about less than a third of those were cultivated. So people have been using numbers between 7 and 900, for quite a while. And I often wondered about those numbers and had a feeling they were higher. And it's just one of those things. It just keeps bugging you. And so I was delighted a few years ago, it's 5 years ago now, when a funded project came up to try to get at it, not just get at a new number, but try to look at some other issues. What are the drivers? What are the reasons something might move from primarily wild collection to cultivation? Is it scarcity? Is it economic? What are the reasons? So it was a fascinating project, and I got to work on it with good friends, and we were able to publish it this year. And so there we found evidence, documentary evidence of commercial cultivation of over 3,200 species. So we more than tripled the previously used number, and I'm delighted to see it's already being cited in some papers. I saw a paper last week where that new number is being cited. So in and of itself, I guess, it's kind of dry, it's kind of boring, but if you're a nerd,
What's
it's
it
pretty.
called, Joseph? What's the name of the paper? It was Is it global estimation?
Yeah, new global estimate. Do I have that paper sitting
Global
out here?
estimation of medicinal plants and commercial cultivation and something else.
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if you can put it up post, but there's a link for a online view only. I can't share the PDF, but you can go to Economic Botany and read it online with the link.
We'll put a link in the chat on the post. So
I can send that to you.
tell us why. What have you found out about why herbs have moved into cultivation? What was some of the conclusions?
Well, we didn't find enough evidence that that conservation status was the driver. Demand seems to be a driver, and this wasn't our primary. This is a secondary question in the research questions we're looking at, but we were asked to look at it. We're also asked to look at methods of production, taking special attention towards conservation-oriented agriculture to see what that was looking like. So we really spent a lot of time trying to see if there was a rise in so-called natural fostering, and natural fostering semi-wild or replenishment, but taking the same genetic stock and planting more of it where it occurs in the wild. And we spent a lot of time trying to find more evidence of that. I have to say we were all disappointed that we didn't find more, but we also, in our limitations of the study, we suspected there is a lot more, but it's not in the published literature, and we suspect there's more of it than we found. Or it's being described under different terminology. But in many cases, we found that companies are involved with controlled cultivation. They want to have better control over the specific quality, especially for large quantities, and trying to get away from the uncertainties of variation in chemistry from region to region or from season to season. So we found a lot of examples of controlled cultivation, which controls for the genetic material, the starting material, the site selection, the methods of agriculture, and the intentional way it's handled, and the scientific measurement throughout the growing period to make determinations looking at the chemistry of when it is the absolute right time to harvest, which is the opposite of maybe traditional or extensive farming, where for example, you may have seen this in arid zones where that are monsoon dependent, where people throw seeds out and hope for rain. They buy seeds off the open market. There's no seed selection. Seed purity is not known. Seed quality is not known, and hope for rain and see what comes. That's the opposite of controlled cultivation. So there's a lot of that. But there's an increase in controlled cultivation and an intercropping agroforestry system. So we were looking at, under the umbrella of sustainable agriculture, we included anything that was called regenerative organic, if it was certified, regenerative organic or Demeter biodynamic or permaculture. These are areas, and then we looked into that to see what innovations are happening that could be called conservation-oriented agriculture. That's what we were looking at. The vast majority of cultivation, I think a surprise for me was that, I don't know if it was a surprise, it shouldn't be at my age, but the global production and trade of medicinal plants is still characterized by micro to small sized production that gets consolidated. So these are smallholders in some countries, smallholders who have home gardens, or what you would call a home garden, where it's not just subsistence, but they're growing some high-value medicinal plants in their home gardens for trade to the broker who comes to the village, who consolidates from multiple sources and then sells larger lots. So micro to small-size production is still big. There's a lot of really tiny organic farms around the world that grow 50 things on 20 hectares. So there's a lot of that. So our evidence of commercial cultivation can't be conflated with all of the supply is coming from commercial cultivation, because in our indications we put to the best of our knowledge, whether it's still mostly wild collected and some cultivated or mostly cultivated and some wild, and then separate line items for different areas, even different areas in a country, and further complicated by the fact that something that is entirely wild collected in its geographic origin is commercially cultivated on the other side of the world. So it comes to market. Rhodiola would be an example. It's almost entirely wild collected in Russia and in Xinjiang, and then there's relatively small amounts being farmed in the United States, Canada, and Scandinavia. So just because we found evidence of commercial cultivation doesn't mean that everything coming into market is cultivated. It's just that we found evidence of cultivation, and it would be an entirely different study to determine the trajectory or the rate of change and et cetera.
Percentages that are coming from different places, yeah. Oh, it's fascinating, Joseph. I mean, we've covered so many areas, and I love hearing your integrated way that you understand the relationship between quality and sustainability and ecological well-being, and of course the people at the heart of it that are facing the daily challenges of wild harvesting or working on a farm. So really love speaking with you. Thank you so much for sharing all of your thoughts, and we'll have to do it again another time, because we're doing a second series in this podcast, and this was all about this lot's all about solutions in a way. So we're mainly looking at health issues of mood or digestion or circulation, etc. So I've really enjoyed looking at the solution for sustainability in a way, and what can we do with these plants that can help people's health so much? How can we make sure we use plants that are grown and collected in the ways that we've been talking about, in a way that brings benefit not just to the health of someone but the health of the whole ecosystem? So I love what you do, and please keep doing it for us. We really need your insight and wisdom. So
well, likewise, always a pleasure to see you and speak, Sebastian. And I think the topic warrants we should spend a half day somewhere with other folks on a panel just to keep this discussion going. It is really interesting and I think important. So thanks for the idea.
Yeah, great. Well, do go and read Joseph's articles, which are on Herbal Reality. They're both fantastic. And you take care, Joseph. Thanks very much.